The snow bit into Seraphine's bare feet like 1,000 tiny knives. She ran anyway. Behind her, the torches of the Valdris clan still flickered through the trees, their orange glow staining the white forest like blood on linen. The drums had stopped now. The chanting had stopped, but she could hear the shouts rising in their place, voices sharp with fury and disbelief. She ran from the bonding. The Thorn Girl ran. Seraphine's lungs burned as she pushed deeper into the frozen wilderness. Her ceremonial gown, white silk embroidered with silver thread, was never meant for running. It tangled around her legs with every step, the delicate fabric tearing on branches and rocks. But she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Not after what she'd seen in Lord Malacair's eyes when he'd reached for her hand at the altar. The memory made her stomach lurch. The way his fingers had felt against her skin, cold and possessive. The way his smile hadn't reached his eyes. And beneath that smile, something else entirely. Something hungry and wrong that had made every instinct in her body scream to flee. So she had, in front of 300 witnesses, in front of her own mother who had arranged this union, Seraphine had torn her hand from Lord Malacair's grip and run. Now the consequences of that decision were catching up to her with every labored breath. "Find her," Lord Malacair's voice echoed through the trees, distant but unmistakable. "She belongs to me by right of treaty. Bring her back." Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribs. By right of treaty. As if she were property to be transferred. As if her father's debts and her mother's ambitions gave anyone the right to hand her over to a man whose touch made her skin crawl. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that obscured her vision and filled her footprints almost as quickly as she made them. A small mercy, if she could just get far enough. If the storm grew strong enough, they might lose her trail. But then what? She had no food, no proper clothing, no idea where she was going beyond, away. The northern reaches were vast and unforgiving, and the stories about what lurked in these mountains were enough to make grown men bar their doors at sunset. Better to die free than live as his possession. The thought steadied her. Even as the cold began to seep into her bones, she had made her choice. Whatever came next, at least it would be hers. A branch snapped somewhere behind her, too close, and Seraphine pressed herself against a massive pine, holding her breath, listening. Footsteps, more than one set, moving methodically through the forest. "She can't have gone far," a man's voice said. "Not in this storm, not dressed like that. Lord Malacair wants her alive," another responded. He was very specific about that. Seraphine's hand flew to her mouth to stifle the sound that wanted to escape. Alive. The word should have been reassuring. Instead, it filled her with a deeper dread than death ever could. She knew what happened to women who defied men like Lord Malacair. She'd heard the whispers about his previous intended, the one who had tried to break their engagement. They said she'd gone mad. They said she'd locked herself in her chambers and refused to eat. They said she'd thrown herself from the tower rather than wed him. But Seraphine had seen the scars on the maid who'd attended that woman. Long, jagged marks that looked like they'd been made by something with claws. And she suspected the truth was far worse than any whisper. The footsteps were growing closer. She had to move. Seraphine pushed away from the tree and ran again, abandoning any pretense of stealth. Speed was her only hope now. The snow swallowed her up to her calves with each step. Her ceremonial slippers had been lost miles ago, and she could no longer feel her feet at all. Just a little further, just a little more. The ground beneath her suddenly disappeared. Seraphine screamed as she tumbled down the slope, snow and rocks battering her body from every direction. She grasped at branches, at roots, at anything that might slow her fall, but her numb fingers couldn't hold on. She landed hard at the bottom of the ravine, the impact driving the air from her lungs. For a long moment, she could only lie there, staring up at the storm-dark sky. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up or die here." But her body wouldn't cooperate. The cold had stolen too much. Her limbs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and distant and refusing to obey. Even the fear that had driven her this far was fading now, replaced by a strange, dangerous warmth. This is how it ends, she thought. Frozen in a ravine, alone in the dark. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, freezing almost instantly on her cheeks. She had tried so hard, had come so far, and it wasn't enough. The snow continued to fall, gentle now, covering her in a soft white shroud. Seraphine's eyes began to drift closed, and then she saw it, a light, faint and golden, flickering through the trees at the far end of the ravine. No. She forced her eyes open wider. It could be them, it could be Malacair's men, but the light didn't move like torchlight. It was steady, warm, like something burning in a hearth behind glass windows. A cabin. Seraphine didn't let herself think, didn't let herself hope. She simply gathered every last fragment of strength in her frozen body and began to crawl. The door gave way beneath her weight before she could even knock. Seraphine tumbled across the threshold and onto a rough wooden floor, gasping at the sudden assault of warmth. A fire blazed in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls, lined with dried herbs and strange symbols she didn't recognize. She tried to push herself up, tried to form words, but her body had finally reached its absolute limit. The world blurred at the edges, sounds becoming distant and muffled. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was a figure rising from a chair by the fire, tall, broad-shouldered, moving toward her with purpose. Then nothing. Seraphine woke slowly, in pieces. First came the warmth, seeping into her bones like honey. Then came the softness beneath her, furs and blankets piled thick enough to drown in. Then came the awareness that she was not alone. Her eyes flew open. She was lying on a low bed near the hearth, still in her ruined ceremonial gown, though someone had wrapped her in additional blankets and placed heated stones near her feet. The cabin was small but well kept, every surface organized with the precision of someone who valued order. And there, sitting in a worn leather chair by the fire, watching her with eyes the color of a winter storm, was a man. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and a face that might have been carved from the mountains themselves, all sharp angles and weathered planes. A beard shadowed his jaw, neatly trimmed. His clothing was simple but well made, dark wool and leather that suited the wilderness around them. There was something wild about him, something that didn't quite fit within four walls, as if he belonged more to the forest outside than to any dwelling made by human hands. But it was his stillness that struck her most. He sat utterly motionless, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, like a predator deciding whether she was prey or something else entirely. "You're awake." His voice was low and rough, as if he wasn't accustomed to using it. "Good. I was beginning to wonder if you'd make it." Seraphine struggled to sit up. "Where am I? Who are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rose and moved to the hearth, where a kettle hung over the flames. "You're in my home," he said finally, pouring something steaming into a cup. "Roughly 15 miles northeast of where you fled from." He turned to face her, and something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. "The Valdris bonding ceremony, yes?" Seraphine stiffened. "How do you know about that? Sound carries strangely in these mountains." He crossed to her, holding out the cup. "Drink this. It will help with the cold still in your bones." She didn't take it. "You could be one of them, one of Malakar's men, a ghost of something, amusement perhaps, or bitterness," crossed his features. "If I were one of Malakar's men, you would already be on your way back to him. Trust me when I say that man and I are not allies." There was something in his voice when he said Malakar's name, something old and deep and full of edges. Seraphine studied him for a long moment. Her instincts, the same ones that had screamed at her to run from Malakar, were quiet now, watchful, but not alarmed. She took the cup. The liquid inside was bitter but warming, spreading through her chest like sunlight. She drank deeply, not realizing how parched she was until the cup was empty. "What is your name?" she asked. "Kale." He settled back into his chair. "And you are Seraphine Thorne, daughter of the late Lord Aldrich Thorne, whose gambling debts left his family beholden to the Valdris clan." Seraphine's fingers tightened on the cup. "You seem to know a great deal about me." "I know a great deal about many things." His eyes met hers, and for just a moment, something shifted in their depths. "I've been waiting for you." The words hung in the air between them, strange and heavy. "Waiting for me?" Seraphine repeated. "That's impossible. I didn't even know I would run until I ran. Not you specifically." Kale's gaze dropped to the fire. "Someone like you. Someone who would flee rather than submit. Someone who would choose death over a life without freedom." He paused. "Someone with the old blood." Seraphine's breath caught. "What do you mean, old blood?" But Kale only shook his head. "You need rest. We can speak more in the morning." "No." Seraphine pushed herself upright. "You don't get to say something like that and then tell me to sleep." "What old blood?" For a long moment, Kale was silent. Then he turned to look at her, and Seraphine's breath caught. His eyes had changed. Where storm gray had been a moment ago, now gleamed a burnished gold, bright and inhuman in the firelight. They held her gaze for exactly 3 heartbeats before shifting back to their normal color. "What are you?" she whispered. Kale rose, moving toward the door. "Get some sleep, Seraphine Thorne. You're going to need your strength for what comes next." He stepped outside into the storm, leaving her alone with the fire and her racing thoughts, and the growing certainty that she had escaped one danger only to stumble directly into another. Sleep, despite Kale's instructions, proved impossible. Seraphine lay beneath the pile of furs, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, her mind churning through everything that had happened. The ceremony, the flight, the fall, and now this strange man in his isolated cabin, speaking of old blood and waiting as if her arrival had been foretold. His eyes changed. The thought kept circling back. They turned gold. She'd heard stories, of course. Everyone in the northern reaches had. Tales of the Vaeloran, the wolf-blooded ones, who had ruled these mountains long before the Valdris or any other clan had claimed them. But those were just stories, weren't they? Legends told to frighten children and explain away the howls that echoed through the peaks on winter nights. The door creaked open, and Seraphine's body tensed. Kale entered bearing an armful of wood, snow dusting his shoulders and hair. He didn't look at her as he crossed to the hearth and began feeding the fire. "You should be resting," he said without turning. "So should you, I imagine." Seraphine sat up, pulling a fur around her shoulders. "Yet here we both are. I don't require much sleep." He did turn then, and there was something almost like appreciation in his expression. "You're not afraid of me. Should I be? Most people would be." He settled into his chair. "Most people who saw what you saw would have already tried to run again. I'm too tired to run, and I've learned that running doesn't always lead somewhere better." Kale studied her for a long moment. "You're different than I expected. You expected someone who would cower and weep? I expected someone who would ask more questions." "Oh, I have questions. Hundreds of them. But I've also learned that some answers aren't given freely. They have to be earned." Something shifted in Kale's expression, a softening around the edges. "That's a hard lesson for someone your age. I'm 23, old enough to know that the world rarely gives without taking something in return." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls. But within these four walls, there was only warmth and the weight of unspoken things. "You asked about the old blood," Kale said finally. "What do you know of your mother's family?" The question caught her off guard. "My mother was a Valdris by birth. That's why the marriage was arranged, to unite our families again after whatever happened between my grandmother and the clan. No one would ever speak of it. But I know she was exiled. Not a transgression." Kale's voice was quiet. "An awakening." "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother was born with the old blood, Seraphine. The blood of the Vaeloran, dormant for generations in the Valdris line, suddenly burning bright in her veins." He paused. "They couldn't allow that. Couldn't allow one of their own to become something they'd spent centuries trying to destroy." "Destroy?" Seraphine shook her head. "The Vaeloran are just stories. Legends. Legends don't leave claw marks on doors." The words hung in the air. Slowly, Seraphine turned to look at the cabin's entrance. There, scored deep into the wood of the doorframe, were 4 parallel gouges, as if something with claws had raked across the surface. "Those aren't from any animal," she breathed. "No." Kale's voice had dropped lower. "They're mine." Seraphine's gaze snapped back to him. Her heart should have been racing with fear. Instead, it raced with something else entirely, something closer to recognition. "Show me," she said. "Whatever you are, show me." "It's not that simple. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it." Kyle leaned forward, firelight catching his face. "Because the blood in your veins will recognize the blood in mine, and once that happens, there's no going back." "Going back to what? To being hunted through the snow? To being sold to a man whose touch makes my skin crawl?" Seraphine's voice cracked. "There's nothing for me to go back to." "Ah, is that what you want from me?" The question seemed to strike something in him. For a long moment, Kale was silent, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. "What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me." The words escaped before she could stop them. Seraphine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Something was happening between them, something she didn't fully understand but couldn't deny. Kale rose abruptly, moving toward the door. "The storm is worsening. You should try to sleep. Tomorrow everything changes." "Kale." Seraphine's voice stopped him at the threshold. "You said you've been waiting for someone like me. How long?" He didn't turn around. "Longer than you can imagine," he said quietly. Then he was gone, leaving Seraphine alone with the fire and the growing certainty that whatever waited for her in the morning would change her life forever. Morning came gray and heavy, the storm having spent itself sometime in the night. Seraphine woke to pale light filtering through frost-laced windows and the sound of wood being split outside. She rose carefully. Someone had left fresh clothes folded on the chair beside the bed. Simple garments, a wool dress in deep green and a heavy knitted shawl, clearly meant for a woman. She wondered briefly who they had belonged to. When she stepped outside, the world had transformed. Snow blanketed everything in pristine white, the trees bowing under its weight like supplicants before an altar. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, shirtless despite the cold, splitting logs with an axe. Sweat gleamed on his shoulders, and Seraphine found herself staring at the way his muscles moved beneath his skin, at the scars that mapped his back like a history written in violence. He knew she was watching. She could tell by the way his shoulders tensed. But he didn't turn around. "You should eat," he said. "There's bread and dried meat inside. We have a long day ahead." Where are we going? Nowhere. He finally turned to face her. But something is coming to us. She should have let it go. But something in her, something that had been awakening since she'd first seen the gold in his eyes, refused to stay silent. Show me, she said again. You said yesterday that seeing the truth would change everything, that my blood would recognize yours. She took a step toward him. I'm ready. You're not. How would you know? Because I've seen what happens when the awakening goes wrong. His voice dropped, rough with old pain. Because I've watched people I cared about tear themselves apart from the inside when their bodies couldn't handle what the old blood demanded. Seraphine stopped moving. Is that what happened to the woman whose clothes I'm wearing? She watched Kael's face shudder. Her name was Alara, he said quietly. She was my sister. The weight of that single word pressed against Seraphine's chest. I'm sorry. She came to me the same way you did, running from a bonding she didn't choose, carrying blood she didn't understand. But the Valdris had poisoned her before she ever reached me. Poisoned? There's a substance. Moonsbane, they call it. It suppresses the old blood, keeps it dormant. The Valdris have been putting it in their wells for generations. His eyes found hers. Your grandmother wasn't exiled for awakening, Seraphine. She was exiled because she stopped drinking the water. Every meal she'd eaten in that estate, every cup she'd drunk. They've been drugging their own people for centuries. Alara had too much Moonsbane in her system when her awakening began. Her body tried to change, but the poison fought it. He stopped, swallowing hard. It destroyed her from within. Seraphine's hand found her stomach. Am I poisoned too? I don't know. You've been away from their wells for 2 days now. If the Moonsbane is clearing from your blood, you might feel strange, heightened, like something inside you is waking up. Seraphine's pulse quickened. Because yes, she had been feeling exactly that. The way colors seemed brighter this morning. The way she could smell the pine sap and wood smoke and something wild and warm that she was beginning to realize was him. It's starting, she whispered. Kael's hand rose, hovering near her cheek. May I? She nodded. His fingers brushed her jaw, and the world exploded. Seraphine gasped as sensation flooded through her. She could feel his heartbeat as if it were her own, steady and strong and achingly familiar. She could sense his emotions, the longing he'd been hiding beneath that careful distance, the hope he'd been afraid to feel, the fierce protective instinct that rose in him like a tide whenever he looked at her. And beneath it all, she felt something ancient and vast, recognizing its counterpart in her. Two halves of something that had been waiting to be whole. There you are, the feeling seemed to say. I've been waiting. When Kael pulled his hand back, Seraphine nearly cried out at the loss. Her whole body was trembling, her blood singing in her veins, and she understood now why he'd been so careful not to touch her. That was the recognition, he said, his voice rough, his careful control cracking at the edges. Your blood knows mine. The bond is already forming. But before he could explain further, he went rigid. His head snapped toward the tree line, and Seraphine watched as his eyes bled from gray to gold. They're here, he growled. Who? Get inside. Now, Seraphine. The command reverberated through her newly awakened senses like a physical force. She stumbled backward, unable to look away as Kael's form began to shift. His bones cracked and reformed. Fur erupted along his skin, his face elongated, teeth lengthening into fangs. Where a man had stood moments ago, now crouched an enormous wolf, silver-furred and golden-eyed, more beautiful and terrifying than anything she had ever imagined. The wolf turned to look at her once, and in those burning amber eyes, she still saw Kael. Then he bounded into the trees, and the forest swallowed him whole. Seraphine didn't go inside. She should have. Every rational part of her mind screamed at her to bar the door, to hide. But the new thing awakening in her blood had no interest in hiding. Instead, she followed. Her feet moved before she consciously decided to move them, carrying her into the snow-laden forest with a speed and sureness she'd never possessed before. The cold didn't bite as deeply now. Her lungs didn't burn. It was as if her body was adapting in real time. She crested a small ridge and froze. Below her, in a natural clearing, Kael faced a hunting party. 12 men on horseback, armed with crossbows and blades that gleamed with an oily sheen, and at their center, mounted on a black stallion, sat Lord Malachar. He looked different in the morning light. The charming mask he'd worn at the ceremony was gone, replaced by something cold and cruel. His pale features were sharp as knives, and when he smiled, Seraphine saw teeth that were just slightly too long, too pointed, to be human. Stand down, beast, Malachar called out. The girl belongs to me by right of blood contract. You have no claim here. Kael's wolf form paced before him, hackles raised. The contracts of men mean nothing to the Vialoran. She carries the old blood. She belongs to no one but herself. Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Malachar dismounted with fluid grace. The girl's grandmother made a bargain with my family 3 decades ago, her bloodline in exchange for her freedom. Ice flooded Seraphine's veins. Her grandmother, what bargain? She called out before she could stop herself. Every head in the clearing turned toward her. Malakar's pale eyes found hers, and his smile became something triumphant. There she is, my promised bride. Kale snarled and lunged, but 2 of the mounted men fired their crossbows. The bolts struck true, burying themselves in Kale's shoulder and flank. He crashed to the snow with a pained yelp, and Seraphine screamed. No. She was moving before she knew what she intended, sliding down the ridge toward the clearing. Don't damage her, Malakar ordered. She's worth more than all of you combined. Seraphine fell to her knees beside Kale. The bolts were barbed, and the oily substance coating them hissed against his fur like acid. Moon's bane, Kale gasped, his form flickering between wolf and man. On the bolts. It's burning. How touching, Malakar said, approaching. Did he tell you what you are, little wolf? Did he explain why I've been hunting your bloodline for 30 years? Seraphine looked up at him. Tell me, she said. Your grandmother was the last true seer of the Valoran. A woman who could look into the threads of fate and see what was to come. She saw me, little wolf. Saw what I truly am. And she saw you. What are you? The same thing your people have been trying to destroy for 1,000 years. His smile showed all those 2 sharp teeth. A ravener. A devourer of the old blood. Your kind created mine by accident, and you've been paying for that mistake ever since. The moon's bane. Seraphine breathed. The Valdris didn't poison themselves to hide from the world. They did it to hide from you. Clever girl. Your grandmother's bargain was simple. She would ensure her bloodline married into families where the old blood could be safely diluted. In exchange, I let her live long enough to have a child. But my mother married my father against her mother's wishes. A man from a family where the old blood ran strong. The pieces were falling into place. And then she had me, a child whose potential shone like a beacon in the darkness. I've been waiting for you to ripen ever since. Seer blood is powerful, and when that blood is consumed at the moment of awakening, the one who drinks it gains the sight for themselves. As the chains closed around Kale's weakened form, as rough hands seized her arms, Seraphine couldn't see any path forward, only darkness. They traveled for hours through the frozen wilderness. Seraphine's hands were bound before her with rope. Behind her, dragged on a makeshift sledge, Kale lay unconscious and chained. The bond between them pulsed like a second heartbeat, growing stronger even as Kyle grew weaker. Through it, Seraphine could feel his pain, the moon's bane spreading through his blood like liquid fire. You're quiet, little wolf, Malakar said, falling back to ride beside her. I expected more struggling. Would it change anything? No, but it would be entertaining. Seraphine kept her gaze fixed ahead. Where are you taking us? The Valdris Fortress. The same altar where you ran from me 2 nights ago. I thought it fitting to complete our bonding where it began. The ceremony requires consent. The ceremony requires blood. Yours, specifically. Freely given or forcibly taken, the magic doesn't particularly care. Then why the pretense? Because power is about more than strength, it's about perception. He gestured at the riders around them. If I bond you in sacred ceremony, if I claim your power through proper ritual, I become something divine. You're insane. I'm patient. I've been planning this for 3 decades. Your father's gambling debts weren't an accident. I've been slowly destroying your family's fortune since before you were born. Everything she'd believed about her family's downfall had been orchestrated, manipulated. You destroyed my father. I destroyed an obstacle. His death was a bonus. Something cracked inside Seraphine. She felt the change begin in her blood. It wasn't the gentle awakening Kale had described. This was violent, desperate, a dam breaking under pressure. Heat flooded her veins, her vision sharpened, and beneath it all, rising like a tide, came something that felt like moonlight and fury. The sight, she realized. I'm seeing. She saw her grandmother, young and fierce, standing before a creature of shadow and hunger, saw the bargain being struck, tears streaming down her grandmother's face as she traded her descendants' freedom for a chance, just a chance, that one of them might someday be strong enough to end the Ravener's reign. Saw the years that followed, the careful planning, the hidden messages woven into bedtime stories and family traditions, all of it leading here, and she saw herself, not as she was now, bound and helpless, but as she could become, a figure wreathed in silver light, wolf and woman merged into something unprecedented, something even Malakar couldn't consume, a seer who could not only see the threads of fate but reach out and pull them. You were never meant to be prey, her grandmother's voice whispered. You were always meant to be the hunter. The vision shattered. Malakar grabbed her arm. What did you see? She looked up at him, and she knew her eyes had changed, could feel the gold burning in them. Your end, she whispered, before the blow could land. A howl split the air, then another, and another. From the tree line on every side, wolves emerged, dozens of them, eyes blazing gold, teeth bared. Kale's pack had come. In the chaos, Seraphine stumbled toward Kale. "Wake up," she pleaded. "Your pack is here. They need you." "Seraphine." His voice in her mind was weak. "You need to run. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Malachar will kill the pack to get to you. Run. Lead him away." "I don't know where to go." The mountain. An image formed in her mind. A peak rising above the tree line, ancient stones marking a path, the place of first awakening. "If you can reach it, if you can complete your transformation before he catches you, I'll die. The moon's bane in my blood. Maybe. But your grandmother's blood was strong enough to birth a seer. You have that same strength." A wolf's pained yelp cut through the air. More blood in the snow. "I'll find you," Kale thought. "If it takes days, or weeks, or years. This I swear." Seraphine pressed her forehead to his, just for a moment. She felt the bond strengthen with the contact, felt it become something like a promise. Then she rose, and she ran. "The girl!" Malachar's furious shriek followed her. "Leave the beasts! After the girl!" And Kale's voice in her mind, growing fainter with distance. "Run, my heart. Run and don't look back." The mountain rose before Seraphine like a sentinel of stone and ice. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but she didn't slow down. Behind her, closer than she wanted to admit, she could hear Malachar's pursuit. "Kale." She reached through the bond. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. The connection was now barely a whisper, stretched thin by distance. "Please don't be dead." The ancient stones Kale had shown her in the vision began to appear, half buried in snow, carved with symbols that made her blood hum with recognition. She was close. Pain exploded through her body. Seraphine collapsed into the snow, a scream tearing from her throat as every muscle seized. The moon's bane was fighting her awakening, just as it had fought Kale's sister. "No," she clawed at the frozen ground. "I will not die here." But her body was betraying her. The poison and the power warred inside her, tearing her apart from within. Her vision fractured, glimpses of possible futures flickering past. In one, she saw herself lying still in the snow, Malachar standing over her with triumph. In another, she saw fire and destruction, wolves howling in victory. In a third, she saw Kale, human and whole, reaching for her. "Choose," something whispered. "Choose what you will become." "I choose to live," Seraphine gasped aloud. "I choose to fight." Instead of fighting the change, she surrendered to it. "Take me," she thought to the power rising within her. "Whatever I have to become, whatever it costs." The world went white. When Seraphine opened her eyes, she was lying at the center of a ring of standing stones. The clouds had parted above her, revealing a sky full of stars and a moon so bright it hurt to look at directly. She was still human, still herself, but something had changed. She could feel the old blood singing in her veins now, no longer fighting the moon's bane but having consumed it, transformed it, made it part of herself. The sight was fully awake, and she could feel Kael, not just the faint whisper of before, but a roaring flame of connection. He was alive. He was coming. Impressive. Malachar stood at the edge of the stone circle, his pale face illuminated by moonlight, less human than before. His features had sharpened into something predatory. "I've waited 30 years for this moment," he said. "And here you are, fully awakened, ripe for the taking." Seraphine rose to her feet. "You're too late." "Am I?" "Your awakening is complete, yes. But you're still weak, still learning, and I have been hunting your kind for 1,000 years. "Show me," she asked the sight. "Show me how to defeat him." The vision came instantly. She saw herself fighting him. She saw herself losing. But she also saw something else. A single thread of possibility, gossamer thin, a thread that required sacrifice. "You're right," Seraphine said softly. "I can't defeat you, not alone." Finally, some wisdom. "But I don't have to defeat you." She reached for the bond, for Kael, and poured everything she had into the connection. "Take it," she thought at him. "Take everything I have. Use it to heal. Use it to find me." The bond flared bright enough to blind, and Seraphine felt herself falling. Malachar caught her before she hit the ground. "What did you do?" he snarled, shaking her. Seraphine couldn't answer. She had given too much. The sight was fading, her power draining away through the bond. "Worth it," she thought dimly. "If he lives, it's worth it. Foolish girl. By the time your wolf reaches this place, you'll be nothing but an empty husk." He pulled her close, his mouth near her throat. This was it. This was how it ended. "I'm sorry," she thought at the fading bond. "Kale, I'm so sorry." And then, impossible and miraculous, she felt him answer. "Hold on, my My heart. I'm coming. The bond that had been draining her suddenly reversed, power flooding back into her from him, from the pack, from something vast and ancient. Her eyes flew open, blazing gold. A howl split the night. Not one wolf, dozens, hundreds. Seraphine smiled, blood on her teeth. You forgot something, she whispered. What? Wolves mate for life. They came out of the darkness like a silver tide. Wolves poured into the stone circle from every direction. Some were massive, ancient creatures. Others were young and fierce. And at their head, leading the charge, was Kale. He was transformed. The moonsbane wounds that should have killed him were healed, his silver fur gleaming in the moonlight, his form larger and more powerful than before. Through their bond, Seraphine understood. Her sacrifice had awakened something in the pack. Her willingness to give everything for one of their own had called to the old magic. They had answered, pouring their strength into Kale, making him alpha in truth, not just in name. Malachar released Seraphine and spun to face the wolves. This is impossible. The packs were scattered, broken. The Violarin were never broken. Kale's voice emerged from his wolf form. We were waiting, hiding, preparing for this moment. He prowled forward, and the other wolves fanned out around him, encircling Malachar. You've hunted us for 1,000 years, consumed our blood, murdered our families. His lips pulled back in a snarl. We let you believe we were prey. The first raveners were an accident, Seraphine said, rising to her feet. Strength was flowing back into her. A corruption of the old blood. My grandmother saw the truth of your origin. My grandmother was a seer who saw this moment 3 decades before it happened. Seraphine walked toward him, and she felt the wolf inside her stirring. She knew I would be born, knew I would flee the bonding, knew I would find Kale. She stopped an arm's length from Malachar. She knew you would chase me here, to the place of first awakening, and she knew that when you did, you would finally face what you've been running from for 1,000 years. And what is that? Judgment. Seraphine let go. The transformation took her like a wave, like a song, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering in darkness. Her bones shifted and reformed with pain that was almost pleasure, her body finally becoming what it had always been meant to be. Fur erupted along her skin, silver white and gleaming like moonlight made solid. Her senses exploded outward until she could feel everything. Every wolf in the circle, every heartbeat, every breath of wind, every thread of fate converging on this single moment. When it was complete, she stood before Malachar as something new, not just wolf, not just seer, something that had never existed before, a bridge between what was and what could be, between the seeing and the doing. Her grandmother had glimpsed the future. Seraphine could shape it. Together, she thought at Kale. Together, he agreed. They moved as one. Malachar was fast, was ancient, and was everything the stories had warned about. His movements were a blur of shadow and hunger, claws that could rend steel, teeth that had ended countless lives over 1,000 years of predation. But he was also alone, cut off from the twisted magic that had sustained him. The standing stones sang with power that rejected his very existence. Ancient wards awakening for the first time in centuries. He fought. Of course he fought. A millennium of being the hunter didn't end quietly. His claws found flesh, his teeth drew blood, and more than one wolf fell before his fury. Seraphine felt each death through the pack bond, felt the pain and sacrifice of wolves who gave their lives to bring down a monster. But for every wound he inflicted, 10 more answered. For every wolf that fell, 3 more took its place. And through it all, Seraphine and Kale worked together, their bond allowing them to move in perfect synchronization, anticipating each other's attacks, covering each other's weaknesses, 2 hearts beating as one, 2 souls joined in purpose. Finally, it was Seraphine who saw the opening, a split-second gap in Malachar's defense, visible only to her awakened sight. Now, she thought. Kale lunged low. Seraphine lunged high. Their teeth met in Malachar's throat. The Ravener's scream echoed off the mountain peaks, high and terrible and mercifully brief. Ancient blood spilled across the sacred stones. The body crumbled, dissolved, and became nothing but ash and memory. 1,000 years of hunger ended in a single moment. Dawn found them still in the stone circle, surrounded by their pack. Seraphine had shifted back to human form, wrapped in a cloak. Kale sat beside her, human again as well, his hand clasped tightly in hers. Your grandmother, Kale said finally. She planned all of this. She saw all of this. Whether she planned it or simply positioned the pieces and hoped, I don't know. The sight doesn't work that way. Kale reached up to touch her face. I never thought I would find you. After Ilara, I stopped believing that someone like you could exist. I almost didn't survive it. But you did. His eyes held hers. You survived and you saved me. And you united the packs for the first time in centuries. I wasn't running away, Seraphine said. I was running toward. I just didn't know it yet. Kale pulled her close, and when his lips met hers, the bond between them blazed bright enough to rival the rising sun. She felt his love, his gratitude, his fierce determination to spend the rest of his very long life protecting her, cherishing her, standing beside her as an equal in all things, and she felt something else too. A future unfolding before her. Sight, full of challenges and dangers, but also full of joy. She saw children with golden eyes running through mountain meadows, a pack grown strong and united for the first time in living memory. A world where the old blood no longer had to hide in shadows and fear, and through it all, Kale beside her, his hand in hers, his heart beating in time with her own. Was this what you saw, grandmother? She wondered silently. Was this the ending you hoped for when you made your bargain all those years ago? No answer came from the sight, but somehow Seraphine knew the truth. Her grandmother had seen many possible futures. She had worked and sacrificed and planned to make this one, the best one, possible. But in the end, it had been Seraphine's choices that brought it to life. The past had delivered her here. The future was hers to write. What happens now? She asked against Kale's lips. Now? He pulled back just enough to look at her, and his smile was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Now we go home, my heart. Our pack is waiting. He rose and offered her his hand. Around them, the wolves began to stir, ready to follow their alpha and his mate wherever they led. Seraphine took his hand and stood. Behind her lay the ashes of a monster and the end of a 1,000-year war. Before her lay the wild, snow-covered peaks of the northern reaches and a man who would love her until the stars burned out. She had fled a bonding ritual into the snow, terrified and alone. She had found something far greater waiting for her, not just a cabin, not just a man, a home, a purpose, a love that transcended the boundaries between human and wolf, between sight and fate, between what was and what could be. Seraphine smiled, squeezed Kale's hand, and together they walked into the dawn. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. Big thank you to everyone who's following. Your support truly means the world to me.